Hello everybody, Marcus Godwin here with the SHOOM VREMENY Noise of Time blog. Now it's been a while, I've been going back and forth between Moscow and Petersburg, and so much has happened since the last blog, it's impossible to know where to start. I will try to catch up with all sorts of things, what's going on, the consolidation, if you like, of the attempted putsch in Belarus, which for the moment has failed. Of course, today we have the huge information about what can also be called, I think we will be able to see one way or another, that it was a putsch in the United States. Never again will anyone take seriously any accusations from the United States about voter fraud and so on and so forth. But anyway, we'll see the way this plays out. We've also had some, since I last spoke to you all, some tragic events. The long-term simmering frozen conflict in Nagorno Karabach between Armenians who have been living there for quite some time and Azerbaijanis who claim this territory as theirs has started up again. Already it's about 2 weeks ago the Russian president said that his intelligence estimates pretty much 5,000 people have died. So this is not just some slight skirmish, this is something very serious. And could actually cause very serious problems internally for Russia, because there are many Azerbaijani and Armenian people living here. There are many who are kind of half Azerbaijani and half Armenian. I myself have many friends, many ex-students and so on, who are Azerbaijani and Armenian and living here in Russia or have emigrated or are living somewhere else. This is definitely, it's a tragedy for the people there on the ground, and for the people in those two countries which are being called into this conflict. But again, I mentioned in an earlier blog that there are two, about this conflict, I will say one thing right now. It's suspicious, the timing that this began again. It's not really clear even who fired the first shot. It seems that it was Azerbaijan, but there are many serious commentators claiming no, it was Armenia. We have to look at the backers of these countries. Armenia was the first Christian state in the world, actually, the first independent country known as a state which declared itself for Christianity. Armenia, like its neighbour Georgia, is more than twice as old as Russia itself. However, in the last 400 or 500 years, they came under the protection of the Russian Empire and they became part of the Soviet Union, and actually this aided them enormously. Now, the current president of Armenia is a rabidly anti-Russian, pro-Western person who was put there by a kind of colour revolution about 2 years ago. The president of Azerbaijan, who I really don't know very much about, but he and his father were kind of ruling Azerbaijan in Soviet times, and then he's taken over since and has never been overthrown. So, of course, Western journalists could say that he's some kind of dictator, as our American partners love to say. Somehow they're kind of not. What I unfortunately suspect is, given the politics of the new Armenian government, which is actually not at all patriotic to the 1,000 years, at least 2,000. Some Armenians even told me, no, we've been in existence for 5,000 years. Anyway, Armenia is a very, very ancient country and unique country with apparently two languages, Western Armenian and Eastern Armenian. So Armenians have told me, and so on. He is not patriotic to this at all. He's basically working for the Western elites. Therefore, it is very useful for the Western elites to have yet another conflict in the ex-Russian Empire, ex-Soviet Union, i.e. Russian world, on Russia's doorstep, which creates and is creating a massive headache for Russia and can actually cause problems within the Russian Federation between populations here too. Russia has bent over backwards, as I've been seeing on the media and in presidential and political pronouncements, to remain impartial. Even on the main news, they say, first of all, we will go to our correspondent in Azerbaijan because of alphabetical precedence. In other words, Both countries' names begin with A, but the letter Z in the Cyrillic Russian alphabet is actually quite early. It's one of the first 6 or 7 letters, as I remember. M is exactly where it is in the Latin alphabet, exactly the same place. So they're really bending over backwards to be impartial. It must be said that Azerbaijan, basically the language Azerbaijani, is a kind of Turkish. I've heard my own Turkish friends with Azerbaijani people speaking to each other pretty much fluently with no misunderstanding. There are many other republics and countries now which were part of the Russian Empire and Soviet Union who are also Turkic, whose languages are basically a variation of Turkish. The last thing on earth we need is that somehow these countries would begin to feel that Russia is supporting Christian Armenia against Turkic people. If Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Kyrgyzstans, Tuvans, Tuva is a republic within the Russian Federation where I have been myself and played concerts there. On the plane back, I was sitting next to a lady with a new baby from Tuva, and she said, my husband is a Turkish engineer working here on construction projects. And he speaks in Turkish and I speak in Tuvan. These people are on the border of Mongolia. They look like Mongolians. They sing and play music like Mongolians and sing in this kind of tone singing, this kind of which I can't do properly, but it's, you know what I mean. However, their language is Turkic and the Mongolian language is completely different. So there is a huge block of people, including Tatars, who in Russia, who speak a Turkish-based language. So this conflict could potentially be a very big headache for Russia. This week we have had two, one ex-holiday and one new holiday. One of the newest Russian holidays, I actually think, is one of the most important in Russian history. I didn't realise this when it came under its current name 15 years ago, I think. I remember that my first couple of years here, they still celebrated it as a national holiday today, which is the 7th of November, which is the day of what informed people call the pro-Western Bolshevik putsch and destruction of the Russian Empire, what unfortunately many uninformed people here in Russia and around the world still call the Great October Socialist Revolution, which handed power to exactly the same people in Russia as Joe Biden has apparently, according to our televisions, taken power in the United States today. Did they choose this date by coincidence? Knowing what I now know about the way these people operate and the significance of dates, I've talked about it, I've written about it on a great length, so have many other people at far greater length than me, such as David Icke, for example. I doubt that it was coincidence they waited till the 7th of November. This was one of the greatest victories of the Western Illuminati. They destroyed the Russian Empire, they nearly destroyed the Russian Orthodox Church. Had it not been, ironically, for the Nazi invasion, they probably would have done. They destroyed the Christian family when they destroyed the family of Nicholas II, etc., etc. The other, way back, they chose to make a new holiday on the 4th of November. At the time, I had no idea what this signified. I was just vaguely glad that they were not celebrating as a national holiday this Bolshevik putsch, which of course pitted Russian against Russian, all other nationalities of the Russian Empire against each other. Families were split up, fathers were fighting against sons, brothers were fighting against brothers, against mothers, and so on and so forth. Absolutely tragic and terrible situation. In 1612, what had happened was the Lithuanian Polish Commonwealth, which was in those days a huge power and a Catholic power at that, had invaded Russia and had succeeded where Napoleon would not succeed, and even more where Hitler would fail, to actually not only conquer Moscow but to enter and capture the Kremlin itself. By this time, Constantinople had already fallen, so Moscow was the centre of world Christianity, and it was occupied by this Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, as it was called, whose main goal was to snuff out Christianity in Russia and replace it with Catholicism. Now, I've talked in many of my earlier blogs about why Orthodoxy is Christianity and why Catholicism, Protestantism is not. I'm not trying to insult ordinary Catholics anywhere in the world, as I've said many, many times, including, of course, those now practicing Catholicism in Poland. However, the fact remains, I've recently discovered that like the British Isles and like England, where I grew up, Poland was also an Orthodox country that was conquered by Catholicism later. Poland would not have all these problems with Russia if Poland had remained a Christian Orthodox country. It did not. So this invasion and occupation of Moscow and the Kremlin, the number one goal of this invasion was to eradicate Christianity and replace it with Western Catholicism from the Great Schism, which had already taken over the British Isles in 1066. If they had succeeded, the Russian state as we know it today, and probably the Russian language and all subsequent Russian history and contributions, not only politically, philosophy, but artistically, literally, musically, would not have existed. Also, Christianity would have disappeared off the face of the earth, and heaven knows what would have happened then. Russia itself had been going through what they call the time of troubles. To put it very simply, Russia was divided. There were various princes and various kingdoms vying for power. Somehow or other, Prince Dmitriev, if I'm not mistaken, and somebody who was apparently an ordinary merchant, like a businessman of the day, but somehow got it together to be some kind of charismatic leader, they managed to persuade the Russian princedoms and fiefdoms to unite, and they conquered this Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth and expelled it from the Kremlin, then from Moscow, and then from Russia itself. This laid the way for the Romanov dynasty to be founded and take over, and from this point on, Russia began to expand and began to become a world power and remained the center of Christianity. So November the 4th is the anniversary of this. And it turns out that this has to be one of the most historically significant holidays in the Russian calendar. It is, I believe, equal in significance at least to Dzień Pobiedy, Victory Day, which is the day of victory over Nazi Germany, which is celebrated on the 9th of May here because the armistice was signed at 11:30 Central European time. That was already the next day, the 9th of May in Moscow. Of course, that particular event is still far more alive in everybody's minds, not only because of propaganda, but there are still plenty of people alive who remember the Second World War from childhood. There are some, amazingly and wonderful for them, some actual veterans, people who fought in that war, who have survived. Of course, there are no veterans from the Napoleonic Wars, and there are no veterans from this campaign to remove the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Catholics, from Russia, just as the previous attempt was when the Teutons invaded at the time of Alexander Nevsky, and he famously had to make the choice between the Mongols, the Tatar horde, the Mongol hordes, Genghis Khan and his Tamerlane and so on, who were later on, who were invading from the east, and the German Teutonic Knights, who were also Catholics and invading from the west. He perfectly understood that the Mongols just wanted tributes, they just wanted to exploit the Russian Empire. They were not interested in changing the Russian language, Russian culture, and above all, they were not interested in changing the Russian religion as long as Russians didn't resist. When they resisted, as happened in Kiev, the Mongols sacked them without mercy. However, that was it. The Teutons, just like the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, just like Napoleon, and in a way, this is a more subtle argument, probably like Hitler too, and some of the people who sent him into Russia, wanted to change Russian religion. Of course, at the time of the Second World War, Russian religion had already been under massive attack and actually came back. That's why I said this is a far more nuanced subject. But the first three examples, it's true. So we see that in history, Russia has always, sometimes by the skin of its teeth, somehow by some destiny or some will of the people and or certain leaders, I suspect it's both combined, always stood up for Christianity, even while the Byzantine Empire still existed and Constantinople was still the center of world Christianity. Now Moscow, the third Rome, a fourth there shall not be, has been the center of world Christianity since Constantinople fell. So the sacking of this and the removal of the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth from the Kremlin, Moscow and Russian territory was really the beginning of the modern Russian state as we know it today. and safeguarded Orthodox Christianity for the whole world. So this 4th of November is hugely important, and really it was a stroke of genius. I absolutely say it was a stroke of genius of the Russian government 15 years ago to understand this and put this holiday there. I didn't get it at the time because I didn't know this history, and we never learn this history at school. At schools in the Western world, we never learn any history connected with Orthodox Christianity, apart from the fact that it's somehow obscure and authoritarian and primitive. That's all. My history teacher at school used to teach me. He was a Scots guy who was fascinated by Russia, actually. We had this in common, but he admitted being a Stalinist when he was a young man and so on and so forth. But he said, the Russian Orthodox Church is primitive because they have all sorts of silver and glittery things on their icons and in their churches. And we in advanced progressive Scotland, we don't need this because we just have plain wooden benches and pews and an altar, very simple, and so on and so forth. Well, yes. Sorry, but the Russian Orthodox Church is not primitive at all. It's the reason that Russia exists today, and all other minorities in Russia have benefited from this. All of them: Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, shamans, other people throughout history, and other nations around, such as Armenia, for example, have been protected and benefited from this Russian power. There is many a nuanced argument going on among people in Russia on the right side of the argument, I would say, who don't like the idea of calling Russia a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional society. It's not that they reject the fact that it is, but they want to put forward the point that throughout history it's always been the Russianness that has come round to be the force of this country, the majority, not just the majority in terms of numbers, but somehow the force which has protected all other ethnicities, religions and people which that found themselves within the Russian Empire, within the Russian world. This is pretty much true. It's possible once you start to understand the history and to study the real history that none of us learned at school, not in the Soviet Union and not in Western Europe or the Western world. This is undeniable. But the fact of the matter is, and personally I can't see anything wrong with this, this is called also the Day of Unity. It's also a religious holiday. It's the day of the icon of the Mother of God of Kazan, Our Blessed Lady of Kazan. It's the 4th of November, so this is a religious and a political holiday. In modern Russia they call it the Day of Unity. And, on the television you will see the president with the leaders of Russian Orthodox Church, with the main muftis of Russia, with the main rabbis of Russia, and with the main Buddhist leaders of Russia, and some shamans sometimes, and so on and so forth, to emphasize the fact that this country is a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional civilization, which is true. But it's called the Russian world, and not for nothing, because it is this Russianness which was, and the orthodoxy of Russia was always the number one enemy of the Western invader, from the time of the Teutons in Alexander Nevsky until the time of the Nazi invasion in the Great Patriotic War, and on until all the problems, all the attacks that Russia is having now on its borders and in its. So many bits of the Russian world were kind of hived off and made into artificial independent countries, with the goal of then creating a false nationalism in these countries, as we see now in Belarus. Anyway, that's another subject, and I will probably come to that later. I just want to say that I think it's an absolute stroke of genius that Russia went back into its history, chose one of the most important events, the very most important events in Russian and world history, to make this holiday on November the 4th, and that they are no longer officially celebrating the blackest day in world history, one of the very blackest, when this band of terrorists and exterminators and Russia haters took over with the backing of a secret Western banking cabal, which included all the main countries of Europe, who were fighting each other at the time on the ground, while our young men were killing German young men and being killed by German young men and so on. The leaders of Germany, Great Britain, France, America were getting together and organising the Russian putsch. and training up these terrorists, which is what they were, like modern day ISIS and so on, in Great Britain, in Switzerland, in America. Trotsky spent a lot of time in the United States, living in luxury over there while he's being trained for this. Lenin, it was Switzerland, and so on and so on and so forth. So yeah. A lot of Russians still don't really get this about the 4th of November, and there is frustration among some that the Russian government isn't doing enough to educate their own people about the significance of this event. But however, it's extraordinarily significant. So there you have it. The 4th of November, 15-year-old holiday, one of the greatest, most positive events in Russian history. 7th of November today, one of the blackest days in Russian history. But Russia has survived. Orthodox Church has survived. Russia remains the centre of world Christianity, and now we have to see how well Russia is going to survive the next putsch, which is the certificate of vaccination ID 19. I think everyone knows what I mean when I say 19 or ID 19. Well, okay, thank you very much. See you very, very soon, because there's a lot more to talk about. Catch up. Bye.